Good afternoon, and let's get started over here. Hi Bella, hi Rosemary. I'm going to share the screen so we can follow the text together from the Torah portion. Okay? And nothing like this. Okay, so as we do every week in this time slot, is that we go through what we call Pardes, which stands for Pshat, Remez, Drush, and Sod, the meaning, the hints, the algorithms, and the secrets of Torah. And as we point out, we can take the same verse and appreciate it on different levels. So let's jump into this week's Torah portion. The Torah portion of Eira. It's an exciting Torah portion as we begin the story of the plagues, which really begins the redemption. So it's a great parsha, and I'm going to jump to actually towards the beginning of the parsha. I want to focus on a couple of verses in the opening conversation that God has with Moshe. So Moshe, at the end of last week's Torah portion, complains that he's come to help out, and it's only gotten worse since he's come. And that's why there's the opening dialogue in this week's Torah portion, is where God, where God addresses Moshe and says, things will get better. It's a longer conversation, and he references Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Then he says, don't give up on your task to help the Jews leave Egypt, but rather the time is now, and redemption is coming. And here are the words which God says. Chapter are we? Let's see. Chapter 6, verse number 6 in the book of Exodus. Torah portion of Eira. L'chein, therefore, says God, Emor l'bnei Yisrael, tell the Jewish people, Ani Hashem, I am God. V'hotzeisi eschem, and I will take you out, mitachas sivlos Mitzrayim, from under the burdens of the Egyptians. V'hitzalti eschem me'avodasam, and I will save you from their labor. V'go'alti eschem, and I will redeem you, bezroya netuya, with an outstretched arm, ubishvatim gedolim, and with great judgments. L'chein, says Rashi, the commentary of Rashi over here, based on the promise that I gave to Abraham and Yitzchak and Yaakov, based on that promise, you can tell the Jewish people that I am faithful to my promise, says Rashi. And I will, and I'll take them out as I promised Abraham, and I will take them out. Verse number 7 then continues, V'lakachti eschem li la'am, and I will take you to me as a people, V'hayisi lachem le'elokim, and I will be a God to you, V'yedatem ki ani Hashem Elokeichem, and you will know that I am the Lord your God, Hamotzi eschem, who takes you out, Mitachas sivlos Mitzrayim, from under the burdens of the Egyptians. And then verse number 8 is the Vehevesi eschem el haaretz, and I will bring them to the land, Asher nasasi es yadi, which I raised my hand to give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and I will give it to them as a heritage. I am God. All right, so here you have the verses I want to focus on, verses 6 through 8 in the Torah portion of Va'era. And you can read them again, it's right there in front of you. What messages, aside for the simple meaning in these verses where God says, I'm going to take you, basically, in a nutshell, these verses state, God says, I will take you out of Egypt and I will bring you to Israel. Are there any questions that come to mind when reading these verses? Any questions that come to mind? We'll pause the share for a moment. So here you have again those three verses talking about the Exodus. One basic question which you ask often is, if the Torah seems to repeat itself, there must be a reason for the repetition. The Torah is never redundant. Every word of Torah is exact. Every word of Torah is perfect. Every letter is meant to be. So if you go back to those verses, it seems to be quite redundant. In fact, the Torah says 4 different words. Actually, go counting verse 8, there's 5 different words describing salvation, right? So you have verse number 6 says, V'hotzesi, I will take them out of Egypt. V'hotzesi means I will take them out. V'hitzalti means I will save them. V'ga'alti is I will redeem them, or redeem you, that is. Verse number 7, Lakachti, and I will take you. Verse number 8, and I will bring you. Why the need for all 5? And why the need, why the need to have it? You would think if simply God would say, V'hotzesi, that would be enough. Tell the Jewish people, I will take them out of Egypt. In fact, that's what we call it Yitziat Mitzrayim, that God took us out of Egypt. And in the Torah, throughout the Torah, the story of the Exodus is referenced more than any other section of the Torah. And it always refers to as Yitziat Mitzrayim, going out of Egypt. And yet over here, God tells Moshe, not just tells Moshe, it says, tell the Jewish people, all 4 of these. I will take them out. Again, I'll highlight them again. I will take them out, and I will save them, I will redeem them, and I will take them. Now, I'm not including the Hevesi when I say there's 4 words of redemption, because the 5th one is not really about redemption from Egypt. The 5th one is almost post-redemption. Post-redemption is the idea of being brought to Israel. That's not part of the exodus of Egypt. That's a separate blessing. So let's remove the word Vehevesi for a moment, the 5th word, although maybe we'll get back to it. But in the meantime, let's just focus on the fact that there are 4 words which talk about redemption. And why is there the necessity for the 4 words? So let me share. So Rashi, clearly, who's the primary commentary on the basic questions of Torah, doesn't really address this over here. Rashi doesn't address this. So as I mentioned in the past, the second, perhaps most common, the second commentary to look to understand the Torah would probably be the Ramban. And the Ramban addresses this. And he says, on a simple level, he says that there are 4 different promises here. This is not a redundancy of saying the same thing 4 times, but rather there are 4 different promises taking place. And he says, the first one, I'll go back to highlight it, where he says, I will take them out, says the Ramban. This is Nachmanides, Moshe ben Nachman, who lived in the 13th century, the 1200s. He says, V'hotzesi means, Yavtichem, he promised, Sheyotzi osam me'artzam, that I will take you out of this land. That's the first promise, the most basic promise. I will take you out of this land, which has been a source of such terrible pain to you. Then he says, "V'itzalti, I will save you from any work," says the Ramban. A person can theoretically leave a land, but still be subjugated to that land. How so? If you have to pay taxes, right? So, why? How did the United States of America come about? Because they were in a separate land, but they were still subjugated to England, and therefore they fought for that independence. So, exodus from a land doesn't necessarily mean independence. So, the first v'hotzesi is exodus. V'hitzalti, says the Ramban, is that they don't have to pay taxes, which means, in other words, independence. God says, I promise you independence. V'go'alti, the third word, says the Rambam. Here he says it's a little bit more esoteric. The third word, go'alti, which we translate as redemption, is ge'ula. But actually, ge'ula also means, I'm trying to find the right wording over here. Yomru Mitzrayim, hine lecha Yisrael bepidyon nafshein. Geula could also mean like to redeem my soul. You know, if I want to, the idea of a person can redeem themselves through charity. In other words, I have there's some sort of, whether it's a sin or some sort of binding obligation, and I want to release myself by virtue of charity. So the Ramban says the word v'ga'alti is more about the Egyptians, where God says the Egyptians will understand that setting the Jewish people free will be a redemption for their souls. That they will have that level of understanding that the only way for them to achieve atonement, so to say, will be to send the Jewish people, to let them go. As the wording of the Ramban, for those familiar with Hebrew, the wording he says, Ad sheyomru hamitzriyim, until the Egyptians will say, Hine lecha Yisrael, here, take the Jewish people, bepidyon nafshenu, as a redemption for our souls. So it's a greater level than the first two. Again, the first one being redemption, second one being independence. The third one is that Egypt will recognize on its own that they need to set the Jewish people free. That, says the Ramban, is the third promise that God gives. And finally, v'lokachti, the fourth word is, as it states pretty clearly in the verse, that God says, I will take you, this is something else. This is that really the final step, and what we're going to say right now is an enormous idea when it comes to the topic of the Exodus. And that is, God says, the fourth step of the Exodus is that I will take you to me as a people. And I will be a God to you, and you will know that I am God. And herein lies an often forgotten point that exists at many Pesach Seders. We know the Pesach Seder is the second most observed mitzvah by Jews today. Pesach Seder is the second most observed. What is the first most observed commandment? Ritual commandment. I'm not talking about do not kill or do not steal. What is the most observed mitzvah, ritual commandment in Judaism? And the answer is circumcision. Circumcision is by far the highest observed mitzvah, ritual mitzvah. The second to that is the Pesach Seder. But in many Pesach Seders, as people gather around the table, there's a whole lot of talk about redemption and finding contemporary ideas of what redemption is and how we can experience it nowadays, and all that's very good. And aligning it with the freedoms that we exist, that the world pursues nowadays. But this last word of redemption that God says when he tells the Jewish people, and by the way, this is a repeat of an idea that God already told Moshe last week at the burning bush. God says to Moshe, when I take the Jewish people out of Egypt, they will worship me at this mountain. There's an inherent connection between going out of Egypt and receiving the Torah at Sinai. The Exodus is not really an Exodus until we have v'lokachti. They are not free, as counterintuitive as it is, because you think receiving the Torah was the opposite of freedom. Suddenly they had all sorts of obligations. So again, I don't want to go too far into this discussion right now. Why it is that the obligations equal freedom? That's a much better Pesach discussion, and perhaps it's been taught over here before. But the point of the lakachti, that fourth terminology of redemption, is very important to remember, and that is that the hotzesi, the hitzalti, the ga'alti, those three are not a proper exodus until God says, you will become my nation. Then you will be a free people. And that's how the Ramban answers the question of why there are these four terminologies of redemption. Because the Torah does not repeat itself. And therefore, as the Ramban is saying, it is not repeating itself. It's talking about four different blessings within redemption. There is the going out, the hitzalti is the independence. There's the go'alti, where almost Egypt itself, this is interesting, Egypt itself says, you have to go. The only way for our moving forward is if you leave. And the fourth level is velakachti, to be bound to God at Mount Sinai. And obviously every part of redemption, when we talk about going out of Egypt, it is always about today. It is always about where we can go out of Egypt. No other area of Torah do we emphasize this message more than going out of Egypt, that it is a daily obligation to go out of Egypt. In every generation, you have to imagine yourself going out of Egypt. We say that at the Seder table. And the truth is, the Hasidic masters tell us more than every generation. Every person, every day, has to ask themselves, what is my Egypt? Where am I enslaved? How am I enslaved? And how do I experience the Exodus? And so that's the general idea I want us to think about. But perhaps on a deeper level, a person has to ask themselves, where do I have these four levels of redemption in my life? How can first I have to define what the slavery is. What is the slavery that I face? In what way am I enslaved? Then the next question is, how do I leave that? How do I remove myself from that slavery, whether it's an addiction, a bad habit, a dependency, which is not good. So how do I remove myself from it? The first thing is remove myself from that from that negative habit. But beyond that, can I truly be independent of it? Perhaps, like in the analogy where you can leave Egypt but still be paying taxes, perhaps there's the opportunity of not being immersed in a certain area which enslaves me, but I somehow pay taxes. I don't know. I haven't thought this through exactly where you could have that parallel in life. Perhaps you can come to faster than I can, but somehow you're not enslaved, but you're paying taxes to some sort of negative element in your life. Then there's velakachti, which again is the idea of that the negative energy itself says, good, you should leave. And finally, vehevesi, that's vigoalti. And finally, velakachti is that even as I leave any sort of slavery or enslavement or Egypt I face in my life, do I understand that the true freedom is not simply leaving something, but then cleaving to something holy and healthy, the Torah and God. That's the true sign of freedom. So that would be the 4 steps of freedom that's being referenced over here. Let me add, so that's more, I think all that which you said so far fits into the level of pshat. Pshat, which we said means simple meaning. Again, we have to understand what is the simple meaning of the 4 words of redemption. So the Ramban provides 4 different explanation of what the 4 descriptions of redemption are referring to. But now let's move on to the drush. So we said there's elements of Torah. And here we have an interesting Gemara. And this is an area of Judaism which you're probably very familiar with. Yesterday, I took my child, or 2 days ago, to a dentist appointment, and the dentist asked me, when is Passover this year? Dentist is not Jewish. In fact, he says he's Greek Orthodox. He says that he was asking because he wanted to know about Easter, but then he said, I love Seder. I love going to the Seder. He says, I always try to get myself invited to a Seder somewhere because I love it. So the Seder, I guess, is enjoyable for others too. And one of the perhaps more enjoyable parts of the Seder, not all parts of the Seder are as enjoyable as one another. Perhaps one of the more enjoyable parts of the Seder is the drinking of the 4 cups of wine. With that, we'll take a sip of coffee. So we drink the 4 cups of wine. Why do we drink 4 cups of wine? So 4 cups of wine are connected to redemption. The wine is a redemptive feeling. So where do we have this idea of the 4 cups of wine? So Says the Gemara, it's derived from the Talmud, Jerusalem Talmud, Tractate Psachim, Yud Amud Aleph. Says the Gemara, Minayin la'arba kosos. Where do we know that one is required to have 4 cups of wine? It says the Gemara, Keneged arba geulos. This is reflective of the 4 redemptions, which is L'chein Amar L'nei Yisrael, and it quotes this verse. The verse over here states 4 different words of redemption. For that reason, we drink 4 cups of wine. So the 4 cups of wine that we have at the Seder table corresponds to the 4 words of redemption that we spoke about over here. V'hotzeisi, v'hitzalti, v'ga'alti, v'lakachti. So we commemorate these verses every single Pesach Seder by having 4 cups of wine. I want to share an idea which really requires more time than we have, but I'll try to condense it into a very brief message. And that is, why is it that at the Seder table, we have 4 cups of wine commemorating the 4 words of redemption, and yet we only have 3 matzahs, right? In the Seder plate, there are 3 matzahs. Why not have 4 matzahs? Matzah also remembers there's also a commemoration for the redemption. So why is it that we only have 3 matzahs? We should have 4 cups of wine. If you think about it, the Seder, we have a lot of 4s. We have the 4 cups of wine. We have the 4 questions. We have the 4 sons. Then we have 3 matzahs. Why 3 matzahs? Why not have 4 matzahs to commemorate the 4 words of redemption? And again, the very abbreviated answer to the question is as follows. Matzah is a reminder of the events that took place the night we left Egypt. We left Egypt on the 15th of Nisan, middle of the night was when the plague happened. We left the 15th of Nisan early in the morning, and we left. That's what the matzah commemorates. We even say that this is the bread that we took with us when we left Egypt. If you are to go back to our verse over here, which we've been focusing on, I'll share the screen one more time. So we've been focusing on the 4 words of redemption. V'hotzeisi, I took you out. V'hitzalti, and I redeem, and I will save you. V'ga'alti, and I will redeem you. V'lakachti, and I will take you to me as a people, and I will be your God. Of these 4, how many happened on the night that they left Egypt, or the morning they left Egypt? Did all 4 of these happen at that time? The answer is no. The first one, v'hotzeisi, I will take you out. Yep, that happened. V'hitzalti, I will save you. That happened. V'ga'alti, I will redeem you. That happened. Now you can say maybe these 3 happened in totality a week later when they went through the Red Sea. But really, right when they left Egypt, these 3 came true. I will take you out, I will save you, and I will protect you. The fourth, which is v'lakachti, I will take you to me as a people. When did that happen? That happens at Mount Sinai. I will take you to me as a people. I will be a God to you. You will know that I am the Lord your God who has brought you out from under the burdens of Egypt. That happens 7 weeks later when they received the Torah at Sinai. So therefore, it makes sense that the matzah, which is only there which the matzah primarily reminds us, not of Sinai, but of the events that took place that night. So it makes sense. The matzah, you have 3 matzahs. Because what happened that night when they took the matzah was the first 3 blessings of redemption. 7 weeks later, when they stood at Sinai, then God says, now you are truly redeemed. That's when you receive the Torah. And for that, we use the wine. The wine commemorates it. The wine represents the joy. Wine represents joy. Wine represents understanding. All sorts of things that wine represent. But on a simple level, wine represents joy, festivity, and we are truly festive about all 4 steps of redemption. In fact, we can only be festive once we had all four. So the matzah, which commemorates, and again, this idea which Rabbi shares, actually, there's a lot more to it. And if you have the ability, I would explore it further. You could probably find this more in depth on Chabad.org. But on a basic level, the matzah represents the events that took place the night they left Egypt. And if you examine the verses carefully, you'll see that the first three happened when they left Egypt. The wine represents the completion, the full redemption which took place, which was all four steps, which concluded at the Jewish people receiving the Torah at Sinai. And therefore the wine, we can commemorate all four elements of redemption. And that's why we have the 4 cups of wine at the Seder table. All right. It's a pleasure studying with you. God willing, we will continue next week, the Torah portion of Bo, continuing in the redemption. May we all be inspired by the Torah portion to pursue the redemption we all need in our lives, individually, whatever areas of Egypt and Pharaoh we are subservient to, we should be able to break free, and collectively as a nation and as a world to experience the redemption with the coming of Mashiach. Have a great week, everyone. Have a good Shabbos.